and it's what keeps it alive. I'm the only staff person dedicated to it now. So I feel it's an honor to have inherited this, and also an honor to work with the kinds of volunteer cooks that we have. So that's my little preface. So let me get into the presentation itself. So just to give you a little bit of perspective, perhaps some of you have been to Fort York, but I bet the majority of you have never been there. You've heard of it, you know about it, but you've never really been there. And the story of the Foodways program at Fort York actually begins with the people who lived there. And what you see is a map of the fort. It's within these fort walls that this program takes place. And the idea of this program is to promote culinary history through the animation of the historic kitchens, and this includes the sharing of period foods and recipes. So if you're patient, we do have some goodies that we brought with us for you to sample. So you will actually see a product from our program today. Taste it as well. So this is the fort that the British had to rebuild after the Battle of York on April 27, 1813. So we're just about to commemorate the bicentennial of that battle during this month. And this map shows the fort at its completion in 1816, and I think that it's amazing that this fort has survived being where it is. The fort today is completely surrounded by the city of Toronto and is flanked to the south by the Gardiner Expressway and to the north by a railway corridor. This is a view of the entrance of Fort York in around 1900, and here's the same view today. Okay. Fort York is a National Historic Site, and it has been restored, maintained, and operated by the city of Toronto. But back to the story, back to the Foodways program. Here is the building in which, or here is another view of the fort, and this shows you the city in the background. Of course, you can't see that view any longer. There's at least a half dozen condos now in front of the CN Tower, so the view is not the same. But you can tell that the city is right there, and it's really a wonderful green spot in a very urban area. But this is the building in the fort within which this research is conducted. This is the officers' barracks and mess establishment. And the mess establishment is where the senior officers lived at Fort York. So this is the way it looks today. And this is the mess dining room, and this is where the officers would have sat down each day to a fine meal. And that's really what we try to represent in the kitchen, this whole idea of setting a fine table for the officers. What kind of work was involved to do that? The meal was prepared in the mess kitchen, and this is where the Foodway program lives and continues to grow. So we research and reproduce the foods based on cookbooks from the late 18th and early 19th centuries, predominantly British, but some American, and of course the cook not mat as well is used in our kitchen. It's through this research that we tell the story not only of officers' foods, but also of the cooks who prepared it. So you can see the kind of hearth cooking that we do, and Fiona, of course, showed you lots of these pictures. Perhaps some of the cooks were like Dolly in the Chop House. This is a little bit stereotypical. But these cooks were not in charge of the kitchen. The person who was in charge of the mess kitchen was typically the mess sergeant or mess man who would manage the mess kitchen for the officers. His role was very much like that of a butler. And here is one of our volunteers, John Hammond, who is looking well in charge while sharpening his knife. This mess sergeant or mess man would have had 2 3, 4 cooks working in the kitchen for him. And yes, that's me. I often think about these women who would have worked like me in front of this fire in the hearth, but we know little about these women. We do know that most were often civilian women hired from the town of York or soldiers' wives. They worked 10 to 12-hour days and were paid approximately a shilling a day. Sometimes soldiers' wives were not paid. The work that they did was just considered part of earning their keep, being at the fort with their husbands. But we do know a couple of cooks who worked at the fort. We know of a cook named Mary Casey, who signed with an X for her pay in 1813. We also have an account by Eli Plater of the York Militia, who wrote of a Mrs. Chapman, who was found to be still cooking in the fort on the day of the Battle of York, and was told to leave immediately for her own safety. Now that's dedication. We also know of a cook from an account of an American militia officer on that same day of the Battle of York, who was in Government House, the home of the Lieutenant Governor, which is also located at the fort, who was found hiding in a potato cabinet. This same account mentions that the dining room table was still set for breakfast with the eggs still in their cups. So the Foodways program has grown and changed over nearly the 30 years. Fiona Lucas, as you know, was pivotal in its evolution and with the continual development of the program. One of the areas that we continue to emphasize is recipe research. And Maya Sangster, our lead cook, has dedicated much of her work to this primary source research, which is the backbone of our program. She's here to share with you some of her experiences in the kitchen. Thank you.